In the scorching summer of 1187, a single man's triumph would echo through the corridors of history for nearly 1,000 years. Salahudeen Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to the Christian world as Saladin, stood victorious on the battlefield of Hattin, having crushed the greatest Crusader army ever assembled. Where other Muslim leaders had failed for nearly a century, this Kurdish warrior succeeded through a combination of military genius, political cunning, and an unwavering vision of Islamic unity. His reconquest of Jerusalem would not only reshape the medieval world, but establish him as one of history's most formidable military strategists and, remarkably, earn the respect of his Christian enemies, who would remember him as the epitome of chivalric virtue. Born around 1137 in the fortress town of Tikrit along the Tigris River, Yusuf ibn Ayyub entered a world fractured by religious conflict and political chaos. His father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, served as a Kurdish military commander under the Zengid dynasty, while his uncle Asad ad-Din Shirkuh had risen to become one of the most feared generals in the Muslim world. The Ayyubid family had fled their ancestral Kurdish homeland in the mountains of Armenia, seeking fortune and honor in the service of Muslim rulers. Young Yusuf grew up in Damascus, the jewel of Syria, where the sounds of prayer calls mixed with the clash of weapons as Muslim armies prepared for the endless struggle against the Crusader states. His childhood was shaped by stories of jihad and the sacred duty to reclaim Jerusalem from the Frankish invaders who had seized the Holy City in 1099. The path to greatness began not with conquest, but with reluctant duty. In 1164, the 27-year-old Saladin accompanied his uncle Shirkuh on a military expedition to Egypt, a campaign that would change the course of his life. Egypt had become the prize in a three-way struggle between the declining Fatimid Caliphate, the rising power of Nur ad-Din of Syria, and the opportunistic Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. When Shirkuh died suddenly in 1169, the young Kurdish officer found himself thrust into the position of Vizier of Egypt, nominally serving the Fatimid Caliph, but actually governing one of the richest lands in the medieval world. Saladin's early years in power were marked by careful consolidation, as he systematically eliminated rivals, reformed the Egyptian military, and built the economic foundation that would later fund his campaigns against the Crusaders. Behind the legendary warrior stood a complex man whose personal relationships revealed both his strengths and the burdens of leadership. Saladin married Ismat ad-Din Khatun, the widow of Nur ad-Din, a strategic alliance that legitimized his claim to Syrian territories. He fathered 17 sons, including Al-Afdal and Az-Zahir, who would inherit fragments of his empire and continue his dynastic legacy. Yet those closest to him witnessed a leader often consumed by the weight of his responsibilities, spending long nights in prayer and consultation with religious scholars, who reinforced his belief that the reconquest of Jerusalem was not merely a political goal, but a sacred obligation. His court attracted poets, philosophers, and religious teachers, creating an intellectual atmosphere that stood in stark contrast to his reputation as a ruthless military commander. Saladin's personal physician, Maimonides, a Jewish scholar, testified to his master's curious mind and genuine concern for justice, traits that would later manifest in his treatment of conquered Christian populations. The decade following Nur ad-Din's death in 1174 transformed Saladin from regional governor into the supreme leader of Muslim resistance. His conquest of Syria required a series of brutal campaigns against fellow Muslims, a reality that troubled religious purists but proved essential for his ultimate goal of jihad against the Crusaders. The siege of Aleppo in 1176 demonstrated his evolving military genius, as he combined traditional siege warfare with innovative tactics learned from his engineers and captured Crusader technology. His forces systematically reduced Crusader strongholds along the Syrian frontier, employing massive siege engines, Greek fire, and sophisticated mining techniques that undermined the massive walls of Frankish castles. The capture of key fortresses like Jacob's Ford in 1179 eliminated crucial Crusader defensive positions and provided Saladin with the strategic depth necessary for his planned assault on the Kingdom of Jerusalem itself. The political fragmentation of the Crusader states provided Saladin with the opportunity he had patiently cultivated for over a decade. When Guy de Lusignan ascended to the throne of Jerusalem in 1186, his weak leadership and the growing influence of aggressive military orders like the Knights Templar created the perfect storm for Saladin's masterstroke. The breaking point came with Reynaud of Chatillon's repeated violations of truces, including attacks on Muslim pilgrimage caravans and his audacious plan to assault Mecca itself. In the spring of 1187, Saladin assembled the largest Muslim army seen since the early Crusades, drawing warriors from Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and beyond. His careful diplomatic work over the previous years had united the fractured Muslim world under his banner, creating a coalition strong enough to challenge Christian dominance in the Levant for the first time in nearly 90 years. The Battle of Hattin, on July 4, 1187, represented the culmination of Saladin's strategic brilliance, and marked the beginning of the end for the first Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. His feigned retreat lured the massive Christian army away from water sources during the brutal heat of summer, forcing them to march across the arid landscape toward the Sea of Galilee. As the Crusaders, weighed down by heavy armor and suffering from dehydration, struggled up the rocky slopes near the village of Hattin, Saladin's forces surrounded them with deadly precision. The Muslim army's mobility, superior knowledge of the terrain, and coordinated archery devastated the Christian ranks. King Guy de Lusignan, the Grand Masters of the military orders, and virtually the entire Crusader nobility fell into Saladin's hands. The True Cross, Christianity's most sacred relic in the East, disappeared from history that day, symbolically marking the end of Crusader invincibility. The aftermath of Hattin unleashed a carefully orchestrated campaign that would reclaim Jerusalem for Islam after 88 years of Christian rule. Within months, Saladin's armies swept through Palestine, capturing fortress after fortress as Crusader garrisons surrendered or fled. The siege of Jerusalem itself began in September 1187, but unlike the bloodbath that had accompanied the Crusader conquest in 1099, Saladin's victory demonstrated a remarkable commitment to mercy and justice. When Balian of Ibelin negotiated the city's surrender, Saladin agreed to spare the civilian population in exchange for ransom payments, personally contributing funds to free those too poor to pay. The image of Christian pilgrims safely departing Jerusalem under Muslim protection created a powerful contrast to the earlier Crusader massacre, earning Saladin respect even among his enemies and establishing his reputation as a chivalrous warrior. The loss of Jerusalem sent shockwaves through Christian Europe, prompting the most powerful rulers of the West to launch the Third Crusade. Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip Augustus of France, and Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa led the largest Christian military expedition since the First Crusade, determined to reclaim the Holy City from Saladin's grasp. The arrival of Richard's forces in 1191 marked the beginning of a legendary rivalry between two great military commanders who would earn each other's grudging respect. At the Battle of Arsuf, Richard's tactical brilliance and disciplined charge briefly shattered Saladin's previously invincible reputation, while the protracted siege of Acre demonstrated the Crusader capacity for sustained warfare despite their initial devastating losses. These campaigns revealed Saladin's limitations as well as his strengths, showing that while he had mastered siege warfare and large-scale strategy, he struggled against the heavy cavalry charges and defensive expertise of veteran Crusader knights. The diplomatic resolution of the Third Crusade revealed Saladin's political sophistication and his understanding that military victory alone could not secure lasting peace. His negotiations with Richard the Lionheart produced the Treaty of Jaffa in 1192, a masterpiece of medieval diplomacy that allowed both leaders to claim victory while acknowledging military realities. Saladin retained Jerusalem and the vast majority of his conquests, while granting Christian pilgrims free access to the holy sites and allowing the Crusaders to maintain a coastal strip from Tyre to Jaffa. The personal relationship between Saladin and Richard, marked by exchanges of gifts and mutual expressions of respect, became legendary in both Islamic and Christian traditions. Their correspondence, preserved in contemporary chronicles, reveals two leaders who recognized in each other the highest ideals of medieval warfare: courage, honor, and mercy toward defeated enemies. As winter settled over Damascus in early 1193, the great conqueror faced an enemy that no military strategy could defeat. Saladin had returned from his final campaign against the Crusaders, exhausted by decades of constant warfare and the administrative burdens of ruling an empire that stretched from Egypt to Mesopotamia. On February 19, 1193, fever and illness claimed the life of the man who had united the Muslim world and reclaimed Jerusalem for Islam. He died as he had lived, with minimal personal possessions, having distributed his wealth to fund religious institutions and support for the poor. His grave in Damascus, simple and unadorned, reflected his personal piety and stood in stark contrast to the magnificent tombs of contemporary Christian kings and Muslim sultans. The empire he had built through personal charisma and military genius immediately began to fragment among his sons and brothers, proving that his greatest achievement had been the brief unity he imposed through the force of his own character. 8 centuries after his death, Saladin's complex legacy continues to resonate through the modern Middle East and Western historical memory. In the Islamic world, he remains the ideal of the righteous ruler, who subordinated personal ambition to religious duty, inspiring leaders from the Ottoman sultans to 20th-century Arab nationalists, who invoked his name in their struggles against Western imperialism. Paradoxically, medieval Christian chroniclers and later European historians celebrated him as the model of chivalric virtue, creating an image of the noble pagan that influenced Western literature from Dante's Divine Comedy to Sir Walter Scott's romantic novels. His military innovations, particularly his integration of diverse ethnic and religious forces into cohesive armies, and his mastery of siege warfare, influenced Islamic military doctrine for centuries. Perhaps most significantly, his example of religious tolerance and mercy in victory provided a counter-narrative to the more brutal aspects of medieval warfare, offering both Muslims and Christians a vision of how faith and power might coexist with justice and humanity.